Hey, Howell here. What I want to do today is a talk entitled Does the Bible Come from Arabia? Very much a question. The bulk of the research is based on a book by Kamal Salabi. He was a professor at the American University in Beirut. And his book is entitled The Bible Came from Arabia, very much a statement. Now, the synopsis is that the Israelites arrived in the land of Western Arabia, mainly the Assyria, in the late 11th century, early 10th century BC. And it was the civil wars of the Israelites that caused large-scale migration at the end of the 10th century BC, where they took everything, the names and the places, to Palestine, and then reconstructed and developed what we know as the Tanakh, the Old Testament. And I'll explain that later. Now, because Arabic is a consonant language, and it had passed out of use in the 5th century, 6th century BC, those responsible for reconstructing it, which wasn't until the 6th to the 9th century AD, that I'm talking about the Babylonian Masoretes here, had to do so guessing where the consonants were, particularly the vowels were, particularly the short vowels. And they had to find help from sister languages like Aramaic and Arabic. What I mean by consonant language is, for example, kitab is book. Okay, the root of it is kataba, and so you would have often it would just be written kataba, and you would have to guess it was kitab, like that, or kitabu, and it's this guessing where the vowels were, and based on the Septuagian, the mess that the Septuagian confusion has caused. The Bible is misinterpreted and mistranslated. I'll explain a bit more as I go through. Now, Mount Horeb, which is very much the scene of Exodus. You know, it's where Moses flees to. He goes there twice. It's very clear in the Bible, from what I read, that it's in the Midian, which is North Arabia. It's never been found in the Sinai Peninsula. And remember that the Israelis actually occupied the Sinai Peninsula for a while and carried out many fruitless digs in the area. So the flaming bush that was burning yet not consumed, understood to be a volcanic area, so looked to the Hijaz with no success, but they later found a crater in the Hijaz, which they may be to do with volcanic activity. So the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, Genesis 19:24, destroyed by brimstone and fire, death from heaven, implying a volcanic eruption. So Sodom, the triliteral root system of that would be Saddama. You would just have the consonants, and you'd be left to guess where particularly the short vowels were. So possibly Sedum in Assyria, or Sudama, but not close to volcanic activity. But there is no volcanic activity in the Dead Sea. Now, the biblical pharaoh, Salabi and other researchers believe this to be a mistranslation caused by the Septuagian. Let me give you the most common mistranslation caused by the Septuagian. Now, first of all, the Septuagian in that BC period, Alexandrian Jews living in northern Egypt, 70 scholars, Philo-Semitic, translated the Old Testament from Hebrew into Greek, and they made many mistakes. So one of them was the Red Sea, where it says in Hebrew quite clearly, the Sea of Reeds. Now, the biblical pharaoh, the root, obviously pharaoh is an English word based on a similar Greek word, and the root of it is paraha. The Hebrew word is paro, something like that, paro. But if we look at the root of it, paraha, right? Not a ruler of Egypt, Salabi says, but a godlike figure, probably human, from the Assyria in Western Arabia. associated with Misrama and Masir, the home of this Western Arabian deity. So, as I said, pharaohs in English were taken from a similar Greek word. The Egyptian word is pera'ah. So he believes that they're confusing pharaoh with pera'ah. I'm not pronouncing these names 100% right. And notice how there's no article. It just says pharaoh. There's no article there. As though it's a name of a deity, rather than some title. It means the great house in Egypt. An Egyptian pharaoh means the great house. Obviously, Misr is Egypt. It is Arabic for Egypt. But again, Salabi and others believe this to be a mistranslation in the Bible, as there are similar names in Western Arabia. It's just assumed to be Egypt. Now, there are many places in Western Arabia. When I say Western Arabia, I'm talking about the Asir, which is just on the coast, northern Yemen. I'm talking about the Hijaz, which is the longer strip of land. And for my own personal research, I'm talking about the Midian, which is North Arabia, below the Yadam. And now he was saying that there's a village called Misrama in Western Arabia and Masir in Wadi Bishma. Now, another bit of evidence he uses is that the biblical Cushites in the Bible, or common translations of it, it's understood that they control the Ger area. I'm not pronouncing these names right. I do try. In southeastern Palestine, above Beersheba, but there is a Cush in the Asir. I'm in a bandstand, so you might hear a bit of background noise, and you might hear me rustling papers here and there. But nearby, there's an oasis called Shababa. He believes this to be the biblical Shibba or Beersheba in South Palestine, meaning that Beersheba is in Arabia. Beersheba means the well of abundance, or seven wells, or well of seven. And there was a Roman general, alias Gallus, on an Arabian expedition 24 BC, and he encountered a place called the Seven Wells. And then what we're looking at, he even suggests that the land of the Canaanites, Canaan, I believe it's pronounced, is from Western Arabia. And that's strange, because I've done a video on the Canaanites, and I read a couple of books, and I was quite convinced that there'd been archaeological finds to prove that Canaanites had been in that area. But there you go. And he believes that the Al-Qunan village in Western Arabia means God of Canaan, and then later transferred to Palestine. Now, this is where it gets a bit difficult to believe Salabi. It's Tehom. The use of the word Tehom is quite a difficult one. Now, Tehom is used very common in the Bible. It's in association with Joseph's blessings, or at least the blessings of him and his descendants. And the famous one is Genesis 2, meaning translated of the deep. I'll come to that later. But the word is used in the Bible many times for Joseph's blessing. Salabi says it's not a blessing, but a definition of a territory and or territorial claim of a tribe. And he believes that every time you hear the word, you read the word Tehom in the Hebrew Bible, in Hebrew, it's referring to the Tehama or the Tehamas of Western Arabia, including Yemen. So there are three Tehamas, one in Yemen, one in the Asir, one in Hijaz. And sometimes Tehom is referred to in the Hebrew Bible in the feminine plural. And he believes that this is denoting the three strips of land that adjoin, the three Tehamas that are adjoin somehow, some way. I don't think they adjoin directly. So if we look at Genesis 14:25, using the Bible Hub, which is a Hebrew translation of the Bible, it says, "By the God of your father, and who will help you, and the Almighty who will bless you," right? What Salabi believes this should read is, "By the God of your father, and who will help you, and the Almighty who will settle you," referring to the Tehama. And then later in Deuteronomy 33:13, And of Joseph he said, blessed of Yahweh, his land with precious things of heaven, with the dew and the deep lying beneath. Now, if we put Salabi's interpretation in there now, and of Joseph he said, blessed of Yahweh, his land with precious things of heaven, with the dew of the Tehama lying beneath. For me, the official translation there sounds less jarred, because it's talking about of the deep and then lying beneath. It says of the deep that lies beneath. It fits there. But the one that gets me the most is Genesis chapter 1 verse 2. Now I'll read Genesis 1 and 2, right? In we all know this is the famous English translation of it. In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Now I'm going to read it with Salabi's translation. In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty, and darkness was over the face of the Tehama, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And so when you see of the deep, he's referring to a particular place of land, area of land. Now what I find difficult about Genesis 1, to Salabi's interpretation, darkness was over the surface of the Tehama, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Now in Genesis 1 and 2 you're talking about a world that's void and formless. You're talking about chaos. You're talking about a world that hasn't yet been formed, arguably no molecules, perhaps no atoms, I don't know. And so why would he be referring to a particular area of a world that hadn't even been created yet? And I'm just wondering, obviously these are Kabbalistic references. I know the Zohar comes later, but it's based on the Torah and the Tanakh. That's where we get the Kabbalah from. And the Kabbalistic references all the way through the Old Testament and the New Testament. The Trinity, I know the Trinity is not actually mentioned in the Bible, but it's kind of referred to implicitly, is a Kabbalistic reference. Now we come to rivers, the use of rivers. And the covenant of Abraham. He's promised the land between two rivers, and they're the two blue lines on the Israeli flag, the two rivers of the covenant of Abraham. And it's commonly understood as the Nile and Euphrates, but it doesn't say the Nile and Euphrates, because obviously those words hadn't been invented yet. But if you look at the Hebrew for Nile, it says Nahar Misraim. Sometimes it just will go Nahar, which just means river. The word stream as a noun is never used in the Old Testament. It's used as a verb. But he believes that this is referring to a stream, a large stream in Western Arabia. And because it's River Misraim, and it's assumed to be Israel, Egypt, Misr, meaning Egypt in Arabic and other Semitic languages. And the Euphrates translates as the Great River, and it's something like Ha Na Ha Hagar. I haven't written it in my note. Didn't write that brilliantly, but it translates to the Great River, and somehow it just assumes that the Euphrates is a great river and the Nile isn't, whereas the Nile is the longest river in the world. And when you see the Nile described in the Old Testament, it doesn't really fit the description of the Nile that we know in Egypt. It sort of dries up left, right and centre and stuff, almost as if it was some kind of wadi or something like that. And the biblical Jordan, River Jordan, Ha Yardan, not a river but a term meaning a ridge or an escarpment, or a place name such as Radan. And he argues that the River Jordan isn't really described so much as a river in the Old Testament. Then we come to the Philistines. And now he doesn't believe that the Philistines, that the official story is that the Philistines come from Crete. And Salabi questions this, saying that the biblical KRT, that's the consonant root Kart, must have been Kareth or Kareth in the Rijah. There is nothing in the Hebrew Bible to indicate that the Philistines, the sea people, the people of the sea, were originally alien settlers, because there's no set boundaries between the Israelites and the Philistines marked out in the Old Testament. He believes it comes from the southernmost Jizan region of Wadi Adam. Oh, that concludes the research on Salabi's book. It's an extremely difficult book to read. I've read it 3 times. But if we look at Laurent Gurion's book, Our God is not our God is your God, but he's chosen us, and looking at a chapter called The Volcano God. Now, Moses flees to the Midian area across the Sea of Reeds and grazes at Mount Horeb, where he first hears his voice. Exodus 19:16. I believe I'm quoting from the book here, not the Bible. Sounds like a volcano, smokes and rumbles like a volcano, then should be, concludes that the Sinai is the Midian in northwest Arabia, as I mentioned before. What I don't understand is why everybody thinks it's in Sinai. It says it in the Bible that it's the Midian, where the Midianites come from, and it says it in the Quran as well. And I know there's lots of sort of difficult things to read in the Quran, but parts of it are very insightful. I believe you me. Galatians 4:25. Paul knew that Mount Sinai was in Arabia, and I've talked about the fruitless digs for the Exodus story in the Sinai. And remember that in the Old Testament, this is a volcanic area, or a near volcanic area, volcanic activity, and he believes Laurent Gurion, or questions that in the Old Testament there are many references to Yahweh loving the smell of carbonized burning flesh, and maybe this is to do with his volcanic origins. You know, he's of some kind of ancient volcano god. Vulcan, I think, is the name. Moving on to Ashraf Ezzard. I really looking at one video of his, a couple of videos, but mainly the one on Joseph. He believes that the Joseph story is an old Arabian folklore tale about the evidence he uses that the names are all Arabian, like Ishmaelites, or names that we associate with Arabia, like Ishmaelite, shepherds, nomadic tribes, herding camels, flock. The person name, Shelah, Hira, Kezib, Olam, Tamer. And I believe there's a girl's name called Tamar, if I remember rightly, something to do with dates, which is a name associated with Western Arabia. And remember that camels weren't imported into Egypt until 332 BC under Alexander the Great. And yet the Joseph story, we're told, is 1549 BC. That's when he was sold into slavery in Egypt. Now, I'm a Joseph mythicist. I don't believe that he ever existed, but there you go. So I don't trust these dates. And the name Yahweh, this is really a kicker. He believes the etymology is Yah, the Arabic Yahuwah. Now, Yah to me is an informal way of addressing someone. Hey, Muhammad, Ya Muhammad, like that. Ya Muhammad. And Yella is Ya Allah. And Hua in this is he. That's what it means in Arabic, Hua. And so he believes that the name Yahweh comes from Yahuwah. Meaning that even the God name, the main God name, is descending from an Arabic name. Don't shoot the messenger. Now, I'm just going to conclude with my own story. I'm under a bandstand and I'm sort of wriggling around trying to get comfortable. Is that the wind has been quite difficult recently, so I'm choosing this bandstand to shelter from the wind. But I believe that there's a link between the Hyksos, and the ancient Israelites. And the Hyksos tried to usurp Egypt from within to a degree of success. And so some of them remained in the country in Egypt, and others were exiled. And some fled to the oasis areas, and some, I believe, must have fled into the Western Arabia, where the biblical story is germinated, and the dates kind of fit roughly for it. And then from there, as a result of the civil wars, all the names and the places were transported into Israel, where the Bible story, which had already been conceived and germinated, was developed. Now, when, as a result of the Alexandrian Jews in that BC period that leads up to the Septuagian, perhaps the Bible got re-Egyptified or Egyptified more. So, but remember, the pyramids aren't mentioned. None of the great temples are mentioned in the Torah, in the Tanakh. The Nile is not described as we actually see the Nile today, and that is quite an issue to address. It's a question that needs to be answered, and so there's my thoughts on my question: does the Bible come from Arabia? And thank you very much for joining me.